My name is Amelia Darrow. I'm a local attorney and resident of Brattleboro. I've been asked to be the facilitator here today in response to a question that has been put forth by a petition for the ballot to include a question regarding whether the select board should pursue the question of a mayoral system of government in Brattleboro. And we are here today to discuss this. The format that we're looking to have is one that really is a question and answer rather than an opportunity to make statements, but considering the size of the group, we may have more opportunity for flexibility on that. The format that we were considering here was that I would introduce the organizer, and she would have a few minutes to tell you about this program and about the history, the background on the ballot question. And then we would go to the panelists, who each have some experience in town government and bring the perspective that of the way Brattleboro has worked in the past in terms of its town government, both historically and currently. And then we would open up for questions, the idea being that those of you who have written down questions can have their questions read. I probably will do that for the purpose of the camera. We do have BCTV recording this today, so the idea is that we want to capture those questions on the camera. And then if at the end all the questions haven't been answered by the panelists, we could have some statements from the public if anyone wants anything else recorded by the camera, and then we'll close the program. So that's the format. We're going to try to keep the questions short and the answers short. It's cold in here, and we may have other things to do this afternoon and to continue this for extended period, but given that the topic is on Tuesday's ballot, it's timely to discuss this at this time. I'm going to introduce you to the organizer of today's event, Millicent Cooley.
Thank you. As Amelia said, I'm hosting the event. Appreciate you all being here. I moved to Brattleboro in December of 2018 and went to our annual town meeting for the first time last March. And I had never attended a town meeting before anywhere, and was deeply impressed by democratic and civil the whole thing was. So when I first heard of the proposal to replace the select board and town meeting representation with a mayor, I was kind of confused about what this meant, and asked how can we learn about it, and is somebody going to explain it? If not, can I help? And it was actually Daniel Quick who said have a public forum, so that's this. So I'm going to read you the proposal wording, which will be voted on the day after tomorrow. Shall the voters of the town of Brattleboro advise the select board to amend the Brattleboro Town Charter to replace the select board form of governance with that of the mayoral form of governance? So although the proposal does not say that the town meeting representation will go away, I'm mentioning that Yates and DeGray, the authors, have specifically stated that town meeting representation, that they would want it to be replaced. So anyway, I look forward to learning more about that from our speakers and from all of you. Dick DeGray and Dan Yates were invited to speak here as well. They said they cannot attend because they're out of town and they do not have somebody to send in their place. So Dan Yates gave me a printed summary. Gave me a summary of what their proposal is about, and that is on the entry there, and we can get you more copies if you want. And let's see, we've got refreshments at the back. Mingling and talking at the end. questions. What we have index cards that were offered for people coming in the door. We'd like you to write your questions down, and then we'll bring them up, and Amelia will read them. If you have a question and you don't have a card, just raise your hand and we'll get one to you. And finally, I just want volunteers to raise their hands and thank them. Appreciate, their work in helping with this. Okay, and thank you all very much.
So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I have a question for each of them, and hopefully you all have questions for them, so we can take this opportunity to learn more about this ballot question. The first person I would like to introduce is Marshall Wheelock. He's a longtime Brattleboro resident, in fact a native, and has served on representative town meeting for, he believes, maybe 50 years. So we have a special expert in that particular forum here with us today. We have Spoon Agave in the middle. Most of you will recognize him. He's been on many of our local town government boards and committees, including the Selectboard, Planning Commission, School Board, among others. And here is David Gardenstein, also a Vermont Brattleboro resident, and has served on the Selectboard for a number of years and was chair for 4 of those years. So I'm going to ask Marshall to begin this question and answer period with a question that I think really goes to his role as a participant and leader in this community, but particularly on this question of representative town meeting and what role that forum plays in town governance. So Marshall, if you could you answer the question of what is the historical role and purpose of representative town meeting, and how is that served under the current format? And please feel free to share more about your background if you wish.
What I'd like to do is start with kind of a brief history of town meetings and our member town meeting, representative town meeting in particular. The early settlers from Europe, when they came to this country, came in small groups. Usually they were of a single religious background, and they found themselves in little clusters in the middle of a unknown and threatening land. Little wonder that the meeting house often became the center for the village, not just on Sundays, but also as a place to meet, discuss questions that pertain to everyone in the town. Thus the invention of the town meeting, especially here in New England. According to Secretary of State Jim Condos in the latest edition of the Commons, the first town meeting in New England was in Massachusetts in 1633. The first one in Bennington, or in Vermont, was in Bennington in 1762, which was 15 years before Vermont was here. It's arguably the most open and representative method of making decisions available. Brattleboro's town meeting is unique in Vermont, and that is the only one in the state where the voting members of the community are selected by ballot to represent the residents of the 3 districts into which the town is divided. I have been told that there are a few others like this in New England, particularly in the southern part of New England, but I have no personal knowledge of where they are or how well they work. While voting on motions is the responsibility of the 140 elected members, any resident may address any issue. There's one voting member for approximately every 70 registered voters in the town. Why is Brattleboro's town meeting unique? Several factors led to the decision to change it. One was attendance. It's been long observed that as the any town's population reaches the 2,500 to 3,000 level and keeps going up, percentage-wise, attendance goes down. And once you get over 5,000, the traditional town meeting framework just doesn't seem to work, at least in the opinion of Frank Bryan, UVM political scientist, back during the years when we being Brattleboro, changed the way we run town meeting. Another problem was the meeting place, which was the Gibson-Aiken building, right across from the post office here. Back then it was referred to as the Armory because that's where the local contingent of the National Guard met. In any event, it did not work well. It was too small. It was virtually impossible to fit as many people in town as were registered voters into the place. Even when it was filled, it tended to get a little close, let's put it that way. Many voters had problems getting there. In fact, there's even a recording incident where two police officers had to carry an elderly woman up the steps to the third floor where the meeting was. Apparently she was not flustered by it, so. Lots of people had lots of things to say of interest only to themselves. That's a direct quote from the long-term moderator of our town meeting back then. And a low percentage of the voters in town, so it was very easy to pack the house and get a pet project through. One of the more notorious incidents was when the concrete stadium, which is up at the baseball field in the current high school, at that point, back in the 40s into the 50s, was owned by the Brattleboro Maples baseball team, which was owned by a small non-profit organization. And at one town meeting, a most convincing group said that it would be really appropriate for the town to buy that since the baseball team was out and wouldn't be using it anymore, but it's something the town really needed. So the town voted to buy it, and afterwards it turned out that all of the eloquent people in favor of it weren't really owners of it. So people got a little peaked about that. In any event, because of these shortcomings, and following something like 7 years of discussion, in 1960, March of 1960, the town voted 1,293 to 749 to change our town meeting to a representative town meeting. And on 3/19/1961, the first meeting was held in the high school gym where it's been held ever since. By 1964, people were grumbling, and there was a movement to return to the original format. That was voted down 1,380 to 859. Same people had the same problems 4 years later, so it was again put before the town to vote, and it was voted to discontinue the member town meeting or representative town meeting and go back to the old one. That passed by 777 votes to 766. A month later came the final vote when people requested a revote, and there it passed 954 to 701. To the best of my knowledge, this is the next time people have been seriously considering doing away with or changing the format of our town meeting. And I think it's interesting to have a little background because, as I like to tell everybody, when you're looking to move ahead, you don't know where you're going until you know where you came from. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
If I may add one small piece of historical background, from the inception of the Selectboard through 1927. It was essentially a three-person board, and the chair of the board was also essentially the town manager. And in 1927, the West Village and the East Village, which were providing their own municipal services, decided to merge. That was the Urban Compact, and beginning in 1928, we had a 5-member board and a town manager, and that's where we have remained for 82 years.
And could you, Marshall, add a little bit about the challenges today to representative town meeting?
Okay, current challenges. One would be the fact that it is difficult to get a full board of representation from the districts. District 2, that I live in, ran into a spell of about 4 or 5 years, where every year, after all of the petitions had come in, the chairman of the caucus for the district had to contact the town clerk to find out how many slots didn't have anybody running for them. At which point he or she would sit down on the phone or call on the neighbors and say, gee, we really need somebody, won't you be a town representative? I'm pleased to say that for District 2, that doesn't occur anymore, or it hasn't for the past several years. I understand that District 1, I think it is, has some problems this year. The second problem, as I see it, is this little book. I got mine early. Most people won't get there, most of the representatives won't get theirs until after the election on Tuesday. It's a lot of reading, but it's all something, if you were a representative in the town meeting, you should have read this, made yourself familiar with what the issues are at least, and just make sure you know what you're talking about when you stand up in town meeting with a problem. That leaves people a little disquieted when someone stands up, speaks for an extended period of time, but without obviously having read this and educated themselves on what's going on. And I guess the other thing is we do tend to let people run on when they're talking. Yeah, I can tell who's been to town meetings. No, this is nothing personal.
I'm going to address that though, Marshall. This year, I'm happy to announce that we're going to deal with that problem, and we're going to have a designated timekeeper.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to turn to David here. David, given your experience on the select board and certainly at the helm at many of these representative town meetings, from your perspective, why do you think the sponsors of this ballot question have brought this forward?
Hi, I'm David Gardenstein. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Thanks, Amelia, for coordinating. I think that when we are presented with a question of whether the government structure should change, the important inquiry we need to make is, how is the government functioning? And are there any problems that we're facing with how the government operates? I've tried to understand particularly why the sponsors of this proposition have brought it forward, but I haven't really been able to identify any ills that would be remedied by a different form of government. So the current form of government has a town manager who is a municipal government management professional, whose responsibility it is to make sure that the operations of the town government are working smoothly. And I like to say that the role of town government is to provide core municipal services in a cost-effective manner consistent with taxpayers' ability to pay. So we have police, fire, public works. Those are the core public maintenance and emergency services agencies. We then have employees who help to contribute to the quality of life, parks and recs and library, and then the personnel who are keeping the government functioning, finance, town manager's office, listers. About 140 people do that work here in town, and I think that it's done really effectively, and it's done in a manner that's separate from political influence. Although public priorities are brought to bear in that process because select board members are elected and select board members appoint the town manager. We have shown the ability to respond to emergencies and to deal with day-to-day business in a very effective manner. When I was elected select board in 2011, Brooks House burnt within 2 months after, and within 8 months after, Tropical Storm Irene had torn out many of the roads and many of our other areas in town. There was real crisis there. We were able to respond to those emergencies really, really effectively, promptly, to marshal resources and to get the town back up on its feet. We also dealt with public infrastructure issues over that time that I was on the board for 6 years. It meant bridges were crumbling and needed to be repaired, and we were able to gather the resources and fix those things, and then also plan for the long term. We rebuilt the police and fire stations. When I was on select board, the wastewater facilities had been rebuilt just before. We've got very innovative programs here in town, and I think the government functions really effectively. It's not clear why a mayoral system would function any better. We have participatory and representative democracy here. It's not an anonymous system. We can all participate. I've served on town meeting for 5 or 10 years. I was on development review board 9 years, including 4 or 5 or 6 years as chair. I was on town school board, high school board, and then 6 years on the select board. Anybody who wants to engage has the opportunity to do that. And we're accessible when we work in the government. I've heard some suggestions that maybe people feel that the system would be more responsive with a mayor. I don't see how that possibly could be. We have a 5-member select board. Everybody is willing to listen, and everybody does listen. I don't see how having a single person as a mayor could possibly be more responsive. I don't see how the nature of the issues that we face would be better served by having a single person serve as mayor. And to me, getting rid of town meeting, which is what I read in Mr. Yates's circular, would only make the government less representative and less participatory. I've looked and listened to try to find out why this mayoral question has been placed on the ballot and what improvements it would make, and I personally haven't been able to discern anything, and I've been waiting to hear it.
Thank you. Spoon, I'm going to turn to you. Would you answer the question as to process? You served on the Charter Committee for 3 years. I understand that if this vote goes through, that the Charter Committee would need to step forward again and review and change the charter if indeed the Select Board decided to move forward with exploring this process. What would that look like?
I'm going to approach this obliquely. That's quintessential Spoon and Gaba. You're not going to know where I'm coming from, but you will know when I'm getting home. When I was younger, I read Rachel Carson and about the effects of chemicals on our environment, and Ehrlich's book on population and the limits to growth, and began understanding how fast and how quickly we're gobbling up our resources on a planet that was not growing. And I became very sensitive and aware of where we were headed. But I didn't want to really believe it. I truly wanted to believe, and I behaved as if somehow it was going to get fixed. It would never happen. And now, 50 years later, it has happened, and we don't know what our future is. And now, fast forwarding to last year's town meeting. Shortly after the town has found itself a new source of revenue for $630,000, and the property owners are sort of thinking how nice that's going to be, $120 for every one for the new, the additional tax revenue, and suddenly the members stop saying, wait a minute, we have other needs than private property. We have a planet that's falling apart, an environment, and they bred back about a sixth of it, about $20 of that, and created a position of a sustainability coordinator to try and lead the town in a new direction. And that is why we are here today, is because some people felt like that was a very poor decision that would not have happened if we had a mayor. That if we take the representatives, the larger representation of town out of the picture, that we will have a smaller group that could be through the electoral process that in our country is generally fueled by money and special interests, that we would more likely have leadership that wouldn't allow such decisions to be made. And so in short, there really isn't anything about what's happened recently that indicates there's much wrong with our system. It could be improved. But there is not really any reason to think that a mayor would produce any better outcomes than we already have.
What about the charter? Can you answer the question about what the charter?
Oh, well, if we went through, the Selectboard would consider that it's there every 15 years. They don't have the choice, but we have 3 more years before that point. But they would be asked to reconsider reforming or constituting a charter revision commission, and then throw these questions into that so they could be studied in depth. And then the Charter Revision Commission brings recommendations and proposals to town meeting. Once the Select Board appoints a commission, they no longer have a role. Now it is the Charter Revision is actually a commission of the people, because it is our town charter, not the Select Board's. And that commission will bring forth recommendations, and there will be forums to talk about them before they're actually formally proposed. There'll be all kinds of things. It's a long process. We've been through it before. We looked at this question in the last revision. We had mayors come down, weak mayors, strong mayors, we had town managers. The whole commission even went up to the state meeting of town managers, and we had a whole session. We had a really big slice of all the town managers in the state actually having a forum with us. So we looked at it pretty closely and could find no compelling reason to make a change, and also for feeling no pressure from the community that such a change was even sought.
Thank you. My mic isn't working, so I'm going to pick up this one. And I'm going to ask members of this group here if any of you have questions. I think that Millicent has had a few written down. Looks like there's one more. So the question is, are there other Vermont cities who have the soft mayoral system? And I've also heard the term weak or strong. Does that retain the select board or the town manager position? So do any of you, first of all, know the different mayoral systems and what form of mayor may be in some of these other towns in Vermont? Who would like to speak to this question?
We speak of two major forms of a mayor, a strong mayor and a weak mayor. And what characterizes that are probably a lot of things, but there are some major things. I can't name them all, I'm not that well versed. But two of the most major is the veto power of the council and the amount of money that a mayor can spend on its own signature, his or her own. A mayor that can only write a check for $5,000 is not going to be at all like a mayor that can write a check for $100,000. And if you can overrule a mayor's veto with, say, a simple majority, 4 out of 7 or 5 out of 9, it's much different from having to have 7 or 8 out of 8 or 9. So there's lots and lots of different ways in which, in fact, this is what the charter does. When you begin to look at it, there are general strong mayor, weak mayor, town manager, but within each model there is an infinite number of ways to design a charter, to distribute power, to create positions, etc., etc. So it's not by any means, there's no there's a huge range. When you're doing a charter, the people are deciding how they would like to have their government run their town, their community, or municipality for them.
Marcia, this one's for you. How can we encourage more participation in representative town meeting?
Good question. If I knew, I would have taken care of it. I don't know. I seem to sense that the younger generation, which is showing up more and more as town meeting members, or maybe it just appears that way since I'm an older generation. But in any event, I think there are more and more young people that are coming aboard who are interested and who will get others interested as well. I don't think it's the type of problem that you can say, okay, you're going to be interested here. It just doesn't work that way. They have to really be interested in the town and the town's effect on their lives, and then they're going to be interested in participating more. And that would be the same whether we're under a town meeting form of government or whether we have one of the, as proposed, the mayoral form of town governments, because if people can't be bothered to be at one internal meeting each year, they're certainly not going to want to approach the mayor or the alderman or city council or whatever we might decide to have with their problems and suggestions and questions. So I don't know what the answer is. Just let people realize something like this might stir up a little interest. I don't know.
about this a lot, because participation is one of the foundations of a democracy. It's not going to work unless there is participation. It has to be more than that. It has to be informed participation. And the people who are participating need to feel that it makes a difference. And so there are, when you stop and think about it and begin discussing it, you find ideas start to pop out, like, I believe the town should direct our schools to teach a much deeper civic education than they do. By the time kids get out of high school, they should fully understand how their local government at least works. They should understand that all power belongs to the people, and why and how, and when it's not happening, and etc. So every community, every member of every community has to fully understand their government. That's on the big picture. On the small picture, we need to get into little habits. An example, I got a card in the mail the other day from the school board announcing a meeting. It was a big card. One quarter of it had the where and when of the meeting. One quarter of it had a indistinguishable picture of something. The other side was essentially blank. It could have been filled with information that the townspeople might have found illuminating and interesting and reason to attend a meeting to talk about. And I know that doing this never even occurred to the school board because they're not in the habit of thinking about transparency, about informing the public. We have gotten, and here's the basic moral, we have gotten into a point where the citizen is expected to take all the initiative to find out what's going on. And that's really unrealistic because there's too much going on. And if you don't even know what to ask questions about, then you don't even ask at all. So we have to direct our government to keep us informed and on a constant basis. There is no reason that a newsletter shouldn't go out with the tax letters and be printed in the media, etc., 4 times a year at least, describing what goes on in the town. So this is a big part of enhancing or attracting, creating participation.
Seems to me the town meeting is a way to make a difference in our own government. Seems to me that participating in town government is a way to be involved and to give back. And anybody who's listening, I certainly would encourage participation and running for those slots, because there are those who say that participating in town government is a thankless endeavor, but I totally disagree.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. This one changes the conversation a little bit, this question. Many people will say that one of the problems in national government and maybe even in state government now is money in politics. But many of us in the community feel that this community anyway is immune from the kind of influence that money can buy when it comes to decision making and participation in governance here. So my question from the audience is, are there restrictions on money used to securing resolutions and local town elections? And if not, should there be? And I'd like the question to be in the context of both the current system and this proposed mayoral system, should it come to pass. David, would you start?
I'm not aware of any specific local regulations that would limit the flow of money into the political system here at the local level. Whatever restrictions exist at the town and at the state and the national level would have to control. There are requirements, as I understand it, for declaring the money that is spent on campaigns. So, for example, I know that although it may be honored in the breach, campaign signs are supposed to indicate on the bottom who they were paid for.
I'm not aware that money has played a lot of influence, but it would have to be examined more closely, because I've sometimes asked myself if you had some sort of experiment and you had one candidate that was given 10 lawn signs and another one 1,000, how would their fortunes be affected? But essentially here in the history that I've seen from what I've been here, money is not an issue. And the influences of that could be more easily controlled through such things as limiting campaign seasons and requiring public debates and any number of others that sort of diminish the effects of money and permit everybody to participate as a candidate.
Nothing to add.
Moving back to the representatives of our town, whether it's the select board or representative town meeting members, are they sufficiently prepared to represent their constituents? And what are the means for preparing currently? So this gets to the question of, qualification to serve.
I've stepped into a series of town government positions over the years, and there's a learning curve for each one. And I've tried to act by the rule that it's better to listen rather than speaking when you first join a board or other municipal body, because you're still learning the ropes. It has been my experience that boards that are charged with making decisions consider all the information that's presented thoroughly, try to gather information from the public and from the people who may have expertise in the area, and that the best function in government is one that works by considering all information thoroughly before making decisions.
I've always been concerned about the quality of decision-making. I would never want to make rules about who could run for an office. I think I sort of like the way it is that we vote for who we want, and but it's also, I don't think it's unreasonable, and I wish if we could get the state to create sort of a mini college course that wouldn't be just 1 4-hour period that the VLC comes down to instruct new board members, but might be a much considerably longer and in-depth sort of course that every select board member would be required to do after being elected as part of their responsibilities. They would learn about town charters and state laws and finances and public debt and other employee benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that really take a long time to learn and understand, and actually several years on the board before you really begin to feel like you understand, when you begin to sort of get a sense that you may know what's going to happen if you do this or that. And so I think education for new board members, there's another way to go about it. The Chinese for years used to require for like 900 years actually. They had a tremendously rigorous educational schooling for people that wanted to be part of the government. Now, there was still an emperor, so there was a slight ceiling there. But it was, as I learned that history was really rigorous. It was quite an accomplishment to get through that. But you were qualified to be in the government making a decision. Sort of like, well, you have to go through to be a lawyer. You just can't wake up and say, I'm going to practice law today because it sounds interesting.
I would agree that the best way to learn is to go through the process. If you want to be a select board member, show up at the select board meetings, follow what they're saying, learn everything you can about what they're doing, and when you get on the board, provided you do, follow Spoon's advice and don't say too much, or excuse me, David's advice. Don't say too much at first. You'll only make yourself look foolish. I don't think there's any way to come up with a standard course to impose on people who want to be select board members. Towns are different enough. Maybe there is. You see, never ask somebody that hasn't sat in the seat. I've never been on the select board, so I didn't realize that. I know if you become a lister, there's courses you have to take, but that's for a specific, I won't say, specific act, let's put it that way.
Bringing this back to the question of whether a mayoral system should be adopted, I will note that it seems to me that there's risk in having a mayoral system where the town manager is replaced by a mayor, because our current system involves a municipal government management professional dealing with the day-to-day operations of the town. And if we were to elect a mayor who was going to be acting as the CEO or CFO of the town, as the day-to-day manager, that person is not likely to have the expertise that the town manager has, and unless they were to resign their day job or didn't have a day job, they wouldn't have the time to dedicate to managing the town government's operations. And we function really, really effectively as a town government because we have a municipal government professional in charge of the day-to-day operations.
We have a question here about process. If on Tuesday the voters choose to bring this question forward to the select board, and the select board then have the power to consider bringing on the charter council again, under a commission to actually look into this question. The select board also have the option not to do so. Because the resolution is non-binding. Now, maybe this question is better directed to the select board members in the audience here, but since you're the panelists, do you believe it possible for the members of the select board to not take forward the question if it is supported, and vice versa? Would they have it within their authority to bring up this question, even if the voters decline to do so? And what is the sort of representation that entails?
Yes to both questions. It's really a political decision that the select board would have to make, whether to proceed forward after a non-binding resolution like this was adopted.
I'll say the same thing, maybe in slightly different ways, but historically, I think we all feel that when a majority of the people vote for something, it is unwise for a select board to ignore it. It can't help but lead to more trouble than it's worth.
I would say that if the vote says that the the majority of the registered voters in town would like the select board to consider the whole project, I think it would be appropriate that that's what happens. It would be a indication of the feeling of the town. It doesn't mean that we're taking a fatal step over the edge of a cliff. It means people want us to check things out, us being the whole town, and I think it would be appropriate that the majority wish be wisely considered, let's put it that way.
There's another question on the process, but before we get to that, this is a time-consuming question to change governance, a model that must be researched and certainly conversations held as to what the effect on this town, how other towns are doing it, what's working, what may not be working in other towns. The select board is busy. They have many issues before them, and as David said earlier, they do a tremendous amount of work and have the possibility of having to respond to crises, certainly as happened with the Brooks House fire and Irene, and who knows what coming crises may be presenting themselves to our body of government. So the question is it worth it to pursue these kinds of sort of lofty questions of governance models when there are day-to-day issues that face this board that really do require their attention?
This is why you throw it into a charter revision commission, who is a much larger number of people and will then again expand it even more. If they are doing due diligence, they'll be talking to many people. When I was on the last revision commission, we invited select board members and just about everybody in town, and one of the members on that committee was Peter Elwell's dad, Corky, who had been town manager for 26 years, knew everybody, and I don't recall ever having heard from anybody that they wished they could have participated and felt like they did not. There is a burden on one person, and he does have a problem, and that was our town attorney, who we had to turn to, although we were using another attorney as much as we could on the state level. Most of our work was done by our town attorney, who's under retainer. It took a lot of his time, and it went on for 3 years. And he was frustrated, and I think he wishes that we had other resources.
It's nice being the last one in line, because usually anything I think of has been expressed already, but I will add that I don't see it as being that big an additional imposition on the select board. They obviously would want to watch the project and make sure it's moving ahead, but as we just heard, there's a way of handling it that could and should be followed.
It's the role of our government to deal with short, medium, and long-term issues. And looking at how the government is functioning is always part of what we should be doing at the local, the state, and the federal level. I don't happen to think that the mayoral system has a lot to offer and would be better than what we have here. So I'm not in favor of this, but if this is what's voted on, it's another thing that will be on the plate that can be dealt with effectively.
There's one more question here, and given that it's just past 4 o'clock, we'll turn after this question to any statements or further clarification questions from the audience here before we wrap up and enjoy enjoy some refreshments and conversation. So if you do have any statements to make or further clarifying questions you wish to bring forward, think of those now while the panelists answer this last question. Who would comprise the body of a charter commission? What sort of members would be asked to step forward and participate in that process?
Can you speak to that?
My own experience was the one I was on, and I assumed it was like this before mine. I think I actually knew most of the people who were on the previous one in 1996 or something like that. It's whoever shows up, and of course you start with hoping that there's enough. In our case, there was. 10 people showed up and requested, so the board said, okay, you're all on it. And that's the way it was. One of them had left after they kind of aged out. She was 96, I think. But other than that, we stuck together and we were the body. If you're lucky enough to have an array of people to pick from, I assume you're looking for, hopefully, the board will have decided beforehand what qualities a member of a commission like this ought to have, and then choose accordingly from those that step forward.
Okay, so I'm going to ask any of you who wish to come forward and make any statements or ask any final questions. Yes?
I came late, so I apologize if this has already been covered.
Just going to have you speak so that, because they're filming, can you step forward here? Say your name and so the camera can catch you. There you go.
Oh, Maria. Terry Carter. I came late and I apologize if this has already been covered, but I know in states like Massachusetts, there's a state law requiring towns to be over a certain population and to have a mayor. And that state towns under a certain population have the regular representation over the select board and reps like we have here. And I was just wondering if the state of Vermont has any specific rules in regards to that. Thank you.
When this first came up and I was talking with Dick DeGray about it, he expressed to me that he checked on how small a city can be in the state of Vermont. He said there's at least one that's only 1,900 people. So I guess there's no limit on how small a city can be in Vermont. I think that was your question, right?
Yeah.
Mine's more of a statement than a question.
Sure. If you turn and speak.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, Maria. I come from Portland, Maine originally, and in Portland, Maine, Ron Carter. I come from Portland, Maine. Portland has a mayoral system, also a town manager. But the mayor in Portland, if I recall, is elected by the council, the town council, and I think they're appointed for a year, and their only job is to break a tie vote. All I have to say.
Here.
Planting the seed, that's all.
Thanks. And we have a question over here.
My question is, how much are representatives trusted by the community to represent the community? Like what's the process by which people who are town representatives come to understand how to represent their constituents? I've asked around about this recently a little bit, and I sent an email to Bob Oster, who's been a long-time rep, and he said, well, we used to have forums around town, but unfortunately those have fallen by the wayside. So how does that work? Or how could it work better, you know?
So your question is as to sort of the constituency. How do they know what they're representing?
Yeah, what's the level of, how full is the understanding of reps going into town meeting about what the constituents in the community want and feel about the issues that are getting voted on?
I don't think that there's really any publicity that happens before town meeting representative elections by which the populace, the electorate, gets to know what individual candidates who are running for town meeting representative stand for. I have seen that after elections, representatives oftentimes try to gather up information about what their constituents' positions are. And so the caucuses tend to serve that role as well. There are caucuses after the informational meetings and before town meeting where people are seeking out information so they can share with their constituents and where they've gathered information from their constituents about what they think. And so that is a mechanism that's used for disseminating information.
I think it's more important for the delegates or the representatives or the members to know what the community, their community thinks than it is for the community to know what each individual representative thinks. Mostly it's on a neighborhood basis. And one of my pet peeves for years has been the fact that when you first run, you can you have to get, I believe it's 30 signatures from people within your district. That means you are going to have to meet with 30 people that you are representing. Once you're in, if you run for re-election, you don't have to get any signatures. You just go into the town clerk's office and sign off that you'd like to run again. I don't feel that's adequate. I probably stepped on some toes when I said it's more important for the candidates to know what the people want than the other way around. If people want something, they're going to approach you about it if you encourage them to, and you will find out in discussion what they want, and they will find out where you stand on the issue.
It is pretty dismaying to walk into town meeting and see a box at the check-in counter filled with town reports that hadn't been picked up yet. People who were either not going to show at all for town meeting that they ran for and asked their neighbors to place them on, or people who just didn't care enough to get the information that they would need. But there are other things that could be done too. That town report that Marshall was just showing us that we will all receive could have a cover page clipped to the front of it, pointing out where the important information is. What page has the budget, has the final important numbers on the budget? Or what page has the information for which Article 16 refers to, and various other things. You can make it easier for people to inform themselves and not feel like they have to read 150 pages hoping to find something interesting. I might add, and most people don't, reading the narrative at the beginning, that alone is a very, very informative piece and really provides one with a sense of where the town is at and what it has done in the past year and where it's headed. I always look at those, at the narrative in front of each report is actually the history of the town, which you find when you go back and read them year after year. So now, I suppose you can get tough too, and say if you haven't picked up your town report by town meeting, you can't come in. But those are other sorts of measures.
Is that available to anybody or only to representatives that have already been elected?
There are plenty of town reports available at the town manager's office.
Thank you.
The question was about the availability of town reports, and they are at the town manager's office, for those of you who didn't hear. Do any of the panelists want to make any final statements to close this process? We do welcome you to stick around if you'd like to have an informal conversation with the panelists and some of the select board members who may want to stay. And we certainly want to thank you for coming out on this chilly day, and thank you to the volunteers and organizers, and certainly the panelists. And if you have a brief statement you'd like to make?
When this issue became apparent to me, when I became aware of it, I asked myself, like everybody did, why is this happening? You know, what are the motives? Is there a hidden agenda? And I could sort of get to some of those answers. I've alluded to them here. But in one of the interviews in particular that the Reformer did, I believe, they were speaking to Mr. DeGray, and he used two words in that, and they jumped out at me, and I saw those were the issues. And the two words are accountability and participation. And those two words are actually independent of the form of government, because regardless of what it is, if we have a democracy, they are necessary elements. And those are the areas that I actually look forward to a charter commission that would look at those two words and try and understand what they mean to everybody and try and find some common meaning, and then to respond and increase to strengthen, if necessary, both of those elements in our democracy.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.